young guys generally in the early stages, they don't like to get beat up by the men. And the Eagles have some grown men, and they just utilize their size and physicality in that game. I mean,
Mike Gill in the house every Monday. Mike Gill will be joining us on a victory Monday or a losing Monday. We haven't had one of those in Philadelphia yet, Mike, but I got to start with this. So after the game yesterday, we're interviewing James Bradbury, right? I don't know if you saw the clip yet, the clip I posted, but you got Darius Slay basically just sitting, he's changing, and he goes, the real question you got to ask is, how did the Giants let you go? And Bradbury's just got to ask the Giants. Boy, Giants fans were really in my feels this morning. Saying, oh, Eagles are lucky they're 4-0, this and that. To me, there's a lucky team in this division, and it ain't the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, it was an interesting day yesterday. No, I don't think the Eagles were so much lucky. I think yesterday kind of shows you that begrudgingly, if you're a Giant fan, Cowboy fan, and I don't know that Commanders are even paying attention anymore, but begrudgingly, you might have to be bold enough to say this Eagles team might be pretty good. Are they the best team in the league? Maybe not, but there's very few teams in the league that are legitimately good football teams. Everybody's got flaws. It's up and down. It's all around. Everybody beats somebody. And then the answer was, well, they didn't beat anybody. There's nobody to beat. All the teams are mediocre. It's a week-to-week mediocre league that the Eagles right now are showing people of a league filled of mediocrity. We're one of the few that is out of the mediocre category. We're actually in the good category. That was a good win yesterday. It's a nasty day. They get down. We talked about Friday. Sal Powell is on my show every Friday, and he said the worst thing that could happen is an early turnover that they convert and you're down playing from behind on a nasty day. And it happened, and they figured out a way to still win the game, and almost in dominating fashion. I mean, take away the first quarter and a half of that game, they dominated that game yesterday against a team that probably in the end is going to be pretty good. Now, is that game played the same way if the weather's different? I don't know. Does Trevor Lawrence fumble 4 times? I don't think it's ever happened in history where guys lost 4 fumbles in a game. They turned the ball over 5 times. Some of that is the Eagles. Some of that could have been the weather. But in the end, that was a good football team on a good football win.
Since at least 1991, no quarterback has ever fumbled the football 4 times in the game. So there's your answer. I mean, it's rare, but look at those conditions. And I'll tell you, I was cold, and I was in the press box. I was cold walking down there. Players were telling me after the game how cold it actually was. Javon Hargrave, I mentioned earlier in the show, he was so cold at halftime because that was I guess when their bodies were trying to warm up. And, he said they were feeling them. They were on the sideline. Lane Johnson was shivering, but Hargrave said something to me that I thought really resonated. We're cold. How are they feeling? I knew they were cold. And I think that's what it was. I think the rain got to them. I think the wind got to them. I mean, if you were a fan of that game, you were not happy to be there. And I think that's what makes the win even more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what happens is in the beginning of a game, teams get warmed up, then the game starts, and then you play, and your body heats up. Then you get that, when you go down to Miami, one of the things about playing the Dolphins in September that's so tough is it's so hot, and you're playing the game, and then you go into halftime, and they blast the air conditioners in the locker room, and you're like, oh, this is nice. And then your body kind of changes, and then you go out for the third quarter, and you're like, oh, my gosh, this is hot again. It was almost reversed this week where, Jacksonville, you play the first half, they played well. Then they go into the locker room, they warm up, and it feels good. And then you get back out there, and you're kind of tense and cold. I just thought the Eagles utilized their physicality against a team that's probably not there yet. That's a young team. They're very talented. They got a lot of – but young guys generally in the early stages, they don't like to get beat up by the men. And the Eagles have some grown men, and they just utilize their size and physicality in that game. I mean, I call a lot of high school football games, and the guy that I do the broadcast with, he'll always say, Run that same play again. Run that play. What's it called? Again. You run it again until they figure out how to stop it. Jacksonville just couldn't stop you yesterday. Miles Sanders dominated the game, but that offensive line dominated up front, and they just ran it again and again and again, and Jacksonville looked demoralized by the end.
Yeah, Jacksonville was one of those physical teams, too. You could tell they're taking on the personality of their defensive coordinator and their head coach. We are going to out-physical you. But they got out-physical yesterday. Absolutely. And James Robinson, a guy who I thought was going to get the rock a lot yesterday, I think he only got 9 carries, Mike. I don't think he got a lot, and I think he was down. I think Travis Etienne was worn down because of the Eagles' run defense and because of what T.J. Edwards was doing. And I thought what really broke their spine was Devin Lloyd, one of their hardest hitters, one of their best playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, took a shot from Jalen Hurts. I thought initially Hurts took the shot, and again, I'm not watching on TV. Then you see the replay on TV, what? Oh, no, QB1 was the guy who decided, I'm going to lower my head, I'm going to provide the boom, and you are not taking that ball away from me in the end zone. You are not stopping me on 4th down. I thought that was a big difference in the game, and those are the type of plays that may get Jalen Hurts an MVP at the end of the year.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because if you were watching it on TV, you thought the same thing, that not only did he take a shot, you thought maybe it could have been a shot that knocked him out, you're thinking, because he dives, he lowers the boom, and the ball does squirt out because it hits the ground. But on the initial quickness of the play, it almost looks like he took a shot so much that he almost got knocked to the point that the ball just came out, and that he might have been just kind of laying there in a graphic moment. But no, once they replayed it and you saw it from a different angle, he actually lowered the boom and ran right through Devin Lloyd, nothing stopping him to the end zone. He actually got to about the 3-yard line and looked like he kicked it into another gear. I mean, it was a tremendous run. And I think at that moment, right, you kind of felt like, all right, they've weathered the storm. They got into the end zone, and then they get the ball back. And, Bradbury with that interception was a huge spot in the game too, because they're driving down Jacksonville again. They're in the red zone, and Bradbury comes in, makes it just an unbelievable catch. There was a couple defining moments in that game, and we go back to where we first started this conversation, is that good teams make. I mean, you got to get that turnover in the good teams get the turnover in that red zone. The mediocre teams that end up being like, oh, okay, they give up 3, maybe 6 in that spot. The Eagles got the turnover in that spot. So there was 2 plays, one on offense, one on defense, that really kind of changed the complexion. Because I think if Jacksonville gets in and scores in that spot, who knows?
Exactly. Well, here's the other one. What if they stop the Eagles, right? Because it's 14-0. Then, so I sit with John Kincaid and the injured Checo, which you 2 guys know very well, and we're debating when they go for it. We're like, they probably should kick here. They probably should take the points on a day like today. They're on the ball down the field. And then we laughed after Hurts scored. We're like, well, that's why we're not general manager. That's why we're not football coaches. That was the wise play there. I'll tell you another part of the game I thought was a genius move that I could see why Nick Sirianni wants to oversee everything instead of calling plays. When he called the timeout in the 3rd quarter so Jake Elliott could kick that field goal because the wind was at his back, and that's where it was all day long, and Elliott was making his kicks, he said, you know what? No, we are taking the points here. And they got even luckier that Jake Elliott was hit. But I think Jake Elliott might have felt that because I thought they were going to kick in the 4th quarter late. And I think that roughing the kicker had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, the whole role that Sirianni plays in this is an interesting conversation because it's, a year and 4 games now into his tenure. It's kind of hard to figure out what he is and what role that he has. But I think that you mentioned the fact that he is a young coach who got this job based on he's an offensive guy primarily, and he is willing to say, what did Doug famously say? Like, that's the fun part, is calling the plays. Well, sometimes, having fun disrupts the success because you have too much on your plate. And Sirianni was cognizant enough to say, we're not our best version if I'm calling the plays. I'm going to give that up. And then now it allows him to see the whole game and make decisions like that and have an understanding. What happened with Denver not that they're any good, but the Nathaniel Hackett thing that he hired a guy. I said, I don't know why more coaches don't hire a guy specifically to run the clock for them. Why would we expect football coaches to also be elite clock managers? Like, you can only be elite at so many things. Why do we think a football coach is going to be some elite mathematician in terms of running the clock? Like, I have no problem with a coach stepping aside and understanding that our team may be better if I'm not doing this, even though I'm maybe better than that guy at doing it, or I'm just as good or whatever. It is lessening my ability to do what he did yesterday. So I think Sirianni is really growing into, that role, and right before our very eyes. And there's moments each week that we see.
And this is one thing I like about his coaching staff. He can trust his offensive line coach in Jeff Stalin. He trusts his offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen. He trusts his quarterback coach, Brian Johnson. On the defensive side of the ball, right? I think Jonathan Gannon gives a lot of stuff to Denard Wilson, the defensive backs coach, because he can trust him. And Denard Wilson is going to be a defensive coordinator in this league, whether it's with the Eagles or somebody else. But you can tell the Eagles have a really strong coaching staff, and players are developing. They're getting better. Like, there's a reason that Kobe Dean don't see the field. Like, TJ Edwards makes plays.
Yeah. No, well, and, I think one of the things that John Gannon has kind of evolved into in his second season now is the fact that he's listening to the players a little bit more, and he has players that he trusts. I mean, you don't listen to the players if you don't trust them. He trusts these guys, and he trusts what they have to say. Look, yesterday, keep this in mind. They won that game yesterday. They started without Maddox, and I think Josiah Scott had a rough day at the office. And them losing Zay Jones. Zay Jones was the exact guy they couldn't lose in a game like that. How many drops did they have? Zay Jones is a sure-handed guy that maybe keeps the sticks moving. I thought Josiah Scott, they went after him a little bit, had a tough day at times. But you have Maddox out. Then you have Slay out, and you still dominated the game defensively with McPherson and Scott playing a lot of snaps yesterday. And I think that is a good indication that Gannon is growing as a coordinator as well. We forget the guy was a defensive backs coach. He didn't come here as, this mastermind defensive coordinator. He was a defensive backs coach. So I think he's kind of growing into the job as well, and getting more talent helps. But yesterday, he didn't have his full brigade of talent, and they still kind of dominated the game on defense.
I didn't get to watch much of it. I know the Cowboys won 25-10. I know the Commanders did not look good based on what I got to see. You watched a heck of a lot more in this game than I did, Mike. What are we making of the Cowboys right now? I mean, 3-1 is 3-1, and they're looking a pretty impressive 3-1 despite the circumstances.
Well, their defense, man. And again, yesterday, their defense. Look, I think Washington has a lot of issues. In fact, if you're talking to people in Washington, it's right back to that there's a lot of more issues fundamentally in the organization, right? That they have that there's something not right there. And I don't know if it's Carson Wentz, if that's already backfiring on them, if they're already thinking, did we make a mistake with this move here? But that Washington team should be better than they are. The Dallas, look, Cooper Rush, give him some credit. I don't know what's going to happen. I think Dak Prescott, there were some reports that he might play in week 5. Rush is playing pretty well. He made some big throws yesterday in that game. But I think what they're doing, Lamb had a good game yesterday too. Remember, he had the big drop the week before and they won the game. But their defense is outstanding. And that's something that when you look at teams in the NFL, if you can be consistent on that side of the ball, you're going to be tough. If you can, it's like the old Buddy Ryan teams, like or the Andy Reid teams, where you would say, McNabb, just run around and make a play or two, and our defense will be good enough that those 2 plays that you make should help us, win a game. So that's where I know it's not that Dallas is asking the quarterback to run around and make plays, but they're keeping it simple. They're playing just tremendous defense right now. And we talk about it at the beginning of the year. The difference between Philly and Dallas when the year started was, well, we thought they had the better quarterback. We thought they had the best defense, but the Eagles may have had a better 53. Well, we're seeing that Dallas's defense is really good. We're not sure if they have the better quarterback, but that defense is good enough to still make this, I think, a pretty interesting race.
Yeah, so one of my overreactions reality checks for CBS Sports this week was if Cooper Rush starts the next 2 games, the Dallas Cowboys can win the NFC East. And I said that's overreaction. But even though I gave Cooper Rush a ton of credit, if Dallas is in the NFC East race, I agree, Mike, is the defense. But they're not playing the Commanders now. They're not playing the Giants. The Bengals win was impressive, but I think the Bengals are a much different team now than they were in week 2. Now you got the Rams. Now you got the Eagles. You got 2 challenges coming up. I mean, the Eagles can really find a way to separate themselves from Dallas, especially if Dallas loses next week. Like, there's blood in the water here. And Dallas, I think, I don't want to say their season comes down the next week because that's a really big overreaction. But I think next week is a real prove-it game for that football team.
Well, every week for them, yesterday, I think if you look back at their box score, I think they ran the ball more than they threw it. How many weeks? Now, they're very balanced. I think it was 29 to 27, 29 runs, 27 passes. There's going to be a couple of weeks where they're going to have to ask the quarterback to throw the ball more. That's where I think Dallas, until Prescott comes back, can rush. Can they keep it balanced like that? Can they keep it where because that's what if you watch that game yesterday and just kind of checking in on them a little bit here and there, every time you turn the game on, they're turning around and hand the ball off to Elliott. He had 20 carries yesterday, 20 carries yesterday. I thought they could use Pollard more. He only had 8 carries in the game yesterday, but that's been the formula for them the last 2 weeks anyway, is turn around, hand the ball off, and then safe throws. I mean, Rush is good enough to deliver it when guys are open, and that's Washington's secondary pitiful right now. Because if you look back at the game 2 weeks ago, or both teams last week, Philly had 9 sacks. Dallas had, 5 or 6 sacks against the Giants. You figured they were going to be all over Carson Wentz. They only sacked him twice, but they pressured him all day long. I think he had 2 interceptions in the game. And again, can they keep winning like that? Yeah, if their defense is going to stay consistently like that, yes, they can. I think that Dallas is going to be – look, most people wrote them off as soon as Prescott went down. The season's over. They're done. Here they are at 3-1. You're pointing at yourself. Right. I figured that defense would keep them around. The question will be, do they play the same style of offense when Prescott comes back? And if they don't, is he healthy and good enough to be the guy they can lean on? That'll be the big question.
Didn't that game yesterday, the Commanders-Cowboys game, didn't it feel like Eagles-Commanders game? Dallas took an early lead. I mean, Washington, the difference was Washington did take the lead at one point in that game, but Dallas couldn't run the ball, and Cooper Rush was still able to beat a bad secondary, and look, the defense took over. And, it never felt like that game, at least from the bits and pieces I watched of it, Dallas was going to lose that game. And
no,
yeah, to me, I think you and I are both correct on this. Maybe we overestimated the Commanders here. I just don't think they're a good football team.
Yeah, I thought the Commanders, look, and it came down to Wentz. And look, he was he had 25 of 42 yesterday. He averaged 4 yards a pass yesterday. Too safe, afraid to turn it over. He still turned it over twice. Look, in 2016, you saw this kid who was a playmaker, a little bit of a gunslinger. In 2017, he matured into almost an MVP candidate. Many people think he would have won the MVP. He gets hurt. 2018, he comes back. Not the same player, but wasn't this guy. 2019, he had the back injury, had a pretty down year, but in those last 4 games, you saw this gutty guy who gutted this team to the playoffs. 2020, he was horrible. Horrible. Last year, you saw a guy that seemingly was building himself back up. But what made Wentz the guy in Philly those first 2 seasons anyway, his ability to get out of pressure, improvise, make plays with his legs. He can't do that anymore. And if he can't be that guy, he's not good enough to and I think we were saying, okay, if he could just be the guy he was in Indianapolis, you know what? That's not good enough either. Not where he is as a passer. And I think you're right. We probably, because they have good talent around him. The defense is not, 2 years ago when they won the division, that defense looked like it was going to be a young, up-and-coming defense, a problem for a while. Now, Chase Young's not out there, but I don't even know that adding him is changing the way that their secondary is terrible. So, yeah, I think we overrate them. The team that we might have to take a look at, you have the Giants at 3-1, you have Dallas at 3-1, and you've got Philly at 4-0. So the pressure is right there on everybody. But we have to now start to figure out, what is this Giants team, right? Yesterday, that was an easy under bet, by the way. My God, those two teams set football back years with their passing games. But the Giants' defense, is that something that they can – I don't think the problem with the Giants is I don't think their defense is consistent enough like Dallas's defense, where you can have limitations on offense. Dallas has some limitations on offense. Their defense hides. I don't think the Giants' defense is consistent enough week to week to hide some of the limitations on offense. So the Giants have more of maybe a ceiling of like 9-8, whereas Dallas, I think, can probably get to 10 or 11.
I'll tell you what, Mike, I think Giants fans are about to get a huge disappointment out of this football team, because all of a sudden now I think they're starting to think they're as good as the Eagles and Cowboys because of their record. Well, guess what? The Eagles and Cowboys didn't get to play the game of the Chicago Bears. So they did. And I was not surprised the Giants won that game yesterday, because they are a better coach team. Because Saquon Barkley right now, in my opinion, is the best running back in the NFL. Daniel Jones isn't turning the football over like he normally does. But overall, the Giants are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're beating teams they're supposed to beat. And that Tennessee win now looks significantly better after what you saw the Titans do the last 2 weeks. And look, the Bears aren't a good team, but the Giants beat them. They took care of business. Their only game they looked bad was the game on the national spotlight. But you're right. I think we have to take this Giants team seriously because they can run the football.
Well, yeah, Jeff, you just kind of hinted at it. You said, well, they beat the Bears, and everybody's going to say the same thing. Nobody's beating anybody, especially in the NFC East. The NFC East plays a pretty weak schedule this year. That was the whole narrative coming in. Oh, the Eagles have the second easiest schedule in the league, and this team's got, the four NFC East teams have 6 or 7 of the 4 of the 6 or 7 easiest schedules in the league because of the divisions that they crossed over and played this year. So, what do they play? They play the AFC South. So they're all playing Tennessee, Indianapolis, Houston, and Jacksonville. So probably the weakest division in football. So each week we're going to keep saying, like we've talked about it a couple weeks ago, when are the Eagles going to get tested? Now they go to Arizona. They had a nice road win last week, but they're horrible at home. They're actually, I think they're 9-1 in their last 10 road games and 1-7 in their last 8 road games. Maybe Tone can look that up for me, but I think I remember talking about that last week. Is they're not a good home team there, but that Arizona team, and I tweeted this yesterday about, they're like everybody else in the NFL. They're mediocre. They're week to week. What team shows up, you never know. That Arizona game might be they played Dallas right before the bye. They got Green Bay in week 12. They just don't have a lot of challenges on the schedule. And we're going to be saying that about everybody. We're not going to learn anything about the Giants because they're just not going to play anybody. And it's like the Eagles last year. They made the playoffs. They got in, but they didn't beat anybody. And then when they got into the playoffs, they played someone and they weren't ready and they didn't stack up. So I think that might be where the Giants could be. They could be like last year's Philadelphia team, where they got into the playoffs at 9-8 and they faced a real team and just figured out that they weren't there yet. But I think that's going to be the whole season, Jeff, because there's nobody on the schedule that anybody's going to be able to get a true litmus test to see if they are ready.
Yeah, you took my word there, litmus test, because I think the Giants might have one next week against the Packers, but that game's in London.
That's the one team. The Packers are the one team that the Eagles play, the Giants play, like that you can kind of stack up. And even they struggled yesterday at home against a pretty mediocre New England team. And I watched a lot of that game.
Yeah, and one of my early reactions was the Packers are the best team in the NFC. And on paper, I think they should be. But you're barely being Bailey Zappi, who never played. It's incredible. Like, defense is better than that. And yeah, their offense is discombobulated right now. It's out of sync. They're getting better by the week. I'll give them credit, but I mean, unless the
They don't have the weapons that they had, and that is a problem. I mean, you have a guy like Devontae Adams, you take him away, I'm not saying, and this isn't to slight Aaron Rodgers in the least bit, but you have a great player throwing to a great player. Now you have a great player trying to find a great player, and they don't have the guys to make the plays that Devontae Adams was making for them, and that shows because in a moment where you need something, he knows he can flick it up in the air because he's that good, Rodgers, just to say, all right, I'm going to get it to you, buddy. That guy's going to go up and go get it. Who's making that play for them right now? Nobody.
Yeah, and this is, to me, the difference between Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. It's the front offices. Green Bay decide, you know what, we're going to replace him with young guys because we're paying Aaron Rodgers a lot of money. The Kansas City Chiefs decide, you know what, we're going to allocate this Tyreek Hill money. We're going to get Marquez Valdez-Scantling. We're going to get Juju Smith-Schuster. We're going to draft Sky Moore. We still have Travis Kelce. We still got a pretty good team. Oh, by the way, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback on the planet. And to me, Mike, it's Kansas City, Buffalo, and everybody else right now. And I'm going to count Philadelphia in that right now. But I think Philadelphia is starting to get in that territory where it is Kansas City and Buffalo.
Yeah, I watched last night. I mean, I was all over the dial yesterday. And I don't watch Red Zone, so I'm watching games, guys. I'm watching
games. Good. I watched that when I got home.
Yeah, I watched. Well, I left last night extremely impressed with Kansas City and look. Tampa Bay's got a pretty good defense, and they steamrolled them. Tampa Bay looked like they didn't belong on this. They were at home. That game started with Tampa as a home underdog in the beginning of the week. They were a home dog in the game. It flipped by the time the game started, but Kansas City just took that defense to the woodshed, man. They did everything they wanted. They got creative. The touchdown they run with a tight end goes in motion. They had Mahomes pointing over here. Everybody went that way, and the tight end snuck up under center and took the snap and ran it in for that was – I don't think I've ever seen that before. But I left very impressed with Kansas City. You mentioned Buffalo. Baltimore is a team that I think is tough. I don't know that they're a team that we're going to give enough credit to. They should have won that game yesterday. Now, I give credit to Buffalo. I give credit to Buffalo going on the road for the second straight week in a tough place to play and coming out with a win. But I think Baltimore's pretty tough. I'm trying to think who else yesterday was like, all right, you mentioned Tennessee. I think we're downplaying Tennessee a lot. They won 13 games last year. They lost A.J. Brown. I think they have to kind of reinvent themselves a little bit. But, by the way, 2 straight weeks I bet Tennessee. That team is an easy bet right now. But I liked not the Tennessee. I don't think they're a Super Bowl team, but I think you're right. They're better than we probably were giving them credit for after the way they started. But there's not a lot of cream rising to the top. I think Philadelphia's got to be. Look, they're one of the 5 teams right now that have a shot.
Yeah, and by the way, you know who Tennessee got next week?
No.
The Commanders. So
okay,
3-2. But overall, Mike, once again, I appreciate you coming on. I love talking NFC East with you on Monday morning. We'll be doing it tonight on Sports Bet at 5:30. Who else you got on today, by the way?
Man, it's too early for me to think. We do football at 4 every day at 4:00. We do the guys from Inside the Birds are on. So today is Jeff Mosher. John McMullen is on at 3:00 every day. Actually, on the day after an Eagles game, it's probably a little later because Sirianni talks. So Johnny Mack joins me. And then Casey Joyner from The Athletic at 5:00. We do one thought on every game. He'll give us a quick thought on every game that he watched yesterday. So that's always a fun and fast segment.
All right, Mike. Sounds great. Listen to the Sports Bash. Comes on at 2:00 on 97.3 ESPN. Mike, I appreciate you, my man. I'll talk to you later this afternoon.
All right, Jeff. See you, bud.